Hello.
How are you?
Fine. Can you listen to me correctly?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, so hello, welcome. Thank you very much for being here today. I hope you're fine given the current situation. Then thank you very much for this opportunity.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for organizing this. I have looked through your questions and I love them so much. And this was a great excuse to put on makeup and real clothes.
Well, everyone, Amanda Foody is the author of the Ace of Shades trilogy and of the fantasy standalone Daughter of the Burning City. And I really adore her books, and today we're going to be discussing fantasy itself, Amanda's life as an author, writing, literature, and some other stuff, so I hope you enjoy this. So, Amanda, here's the first question. Have you always written? Did you always know you wanted to be an author?
Yes, I have wanted to be an author, honestly, since before I can remember. I actually remember being 5 years old and trying my hand at my first story. Um, I started pursuing it, really pursuing it professionally and realizing that it was absolutely what I wanted to do around the time that I was in high school.
That's so nice. So, did you write when you were a child as well?
Yeah, I definitely did. I finished my first full length novel when I was 11. I say full length because it was very short, but it was maybe over 100 pages, which as far as when I was 11, that was quite the achievement. But yeah, I had always tried my hand at stories, and for some reason I also was very much only interested in writing novels. Even as or I really loved the idea of writing whatever I was reading at the time. So when I was reading chapter books, I would try to write chapter books. As I got older, I was writing kind of whatever suited my age group. But then I kind of once I started writing YA, I never really stopped. So yeah, it's always what I wanted to do.
I know you're both a person of literature and a person of numbers. So I'm really intrigued on that pattern, like how those two things can be compatible. So how do you find the balance between the two things in your books, numbers and books?
Yeah, so the background on me is that I used to be a tax accountant. That was my day job. I have my master's in accountancy, and now I'm a full-time author. But a lot of my books, a lot of the ideas that I gravitate towards tend to also be a little bit mathematical. In the Shadow Game series, the magic is actually currency, and there's a lot of different financial operations in it. Like the first book features a Ponzi scheme, the second book
Yeah.
has a stock market. And I had a lot of fun with those. I will say that accounting is actually pretty different than finance. So I did have to do some outside research. But I think that it was fun because I knew that it was kind of unique. There aren't that many other fantasy books I can think of where the magic is currency. So I loved that I was writing something that at least to me felt really fresh. But at the same time, I also completely understand that nobody wants to hear me go on and on about the intricacies of debits and credits. So it was a bit of a balance of trying to explain things as simply and as entertainingly as possible,
Yeah.
but at the same time making the story really unique. I definitely have a whole chapter in Queen of Oats where my characters complain about auditing on my behalf. It's all my beef with my with my experience in auditing in
Yeah.
a little chapter in the book. I swear there's other fun stuff in the series too. I'm really
Well, this
selling
certainly adds something really unique to your book.
it. Yeah, I like to think so.
So, third question. In general, how do you think different passions intermingle with writing fantasy? Like how different things you love in your life can get into your books?
Sorry, my cat is playing with the rice cooker and I'm a little scared it's gonna fall off the counter. Um, okay. I would say that I think being a writer it's a career for somebody who has a lot of passions, but they don't really know what to do with all of them. I
Yeah.
remember growing up, I had a lot of family members.
Oh no.
He's okay. I had a lot of family members and friends who were kind of the mindset oh, you have your whole life to write. Don't you want to be a doctor? That kind of thing growing up.
Yes.
And like honestly, like I did, like I thought everything was cool. I like growing up, I always had this sort of mindset of, oh, I want to write, but like also I want to go to the moon and like I want to like I had all these things. And the fun thing about writing is that you can explore everything you're interested in some
Definitely.
way or another. So yeah, I feel like I've been able to bring a lot of different passions into the books I write. For instance, like my middle grade series, which comes out in 2021, is really inspired by Pokemon, which is just that was just my obsession when I was a small child. So like even these like little interests that aren't even like professional ones, like you find a way to kind of bring them into your stories, and that's I think what makes every book unique and makes the entire experience really really fun from a writing perspective.
Totally.
As far as like fantasy in particular, I mean, I've just always gravitated towards fantasy. I genuinely cannot imagine myself writing anything else. I love magic. I loved Harry Potter growing up. I love like Septimus Heap and Pendragon, and that was all my jam. And yeah, I think I will probably always be writing magic.
Good to know because I'll be waiting for that. So, what's your world building process like? I know you have a whole process for it and your worlds are really unique. So, what does it consist of?
Yeah, so I absolutely adore world building. I've been known to have pretty complicated world building in my books. Typically, when it's one of the first things that I do when I get an idea, like once I have that smidgen of something that feels like maybe it could be a book or something, the first thing I do is actually I start writing because I find that just by putting words on the page and getting a natural flow and letting the story and the character introduce themselves to me, it feels very natural. And so I'll write for, you know, like 1 to 3 pages just to kind of get a feel of what the story actually is.
Mhm.
And usually just by doing so, I'll already figure out a lot about the world. Like I might not know anything until I start writing, and then I know so much. It also kind of helps me be weird, I feel like. I find that just that kind of stream of consciousness, I get more out of it than if I were to really try to like plan everything out ahead of time. But once I have those few pages written down, that's when I do take the step back and I think about the plot of the story. I think about the world. I think about the characters.
Yes.
And my big thing with world building is that I love really complicated worlds. I mean, gosh, the Shadowing series has like a humongous cast of a bajillion characters. Um, but I am of the opinion that every single piece of a story, like even like the character's hobby, the magic system, the backstory of your world, like every little tiny piece needs to ultimately serve the story. Which I think when you're first starting out, not just writing, but like when you're just starting out a book, any writer is
Mhm.
starting out a new project, it's kind of tempting to put a ton of things into one book, like every single passion to throw it all into one project. And ultimately, when you start getting to the point where you have to revise, you usually end up having to cut a few things that you might have really liked in the book because it might end up being too complicated. Like at the end of the day, your character's hobby, that backstory, they all have to kind of fit. They all have to be pieces of ultimately the same puzzle because
Yeah.
when it comes to world building, you could be one of those writers who love descriptions and you describe every single little detail and it's super complex and intricate, but you can't describe everything. And so you need to rely on your reader to sort of fill in the rest of the picture.
Mhm.
And if every element of your story is kind of spread out all over the place, if it's not that cohesive, if it doesn't like match, then it's a lot harder for them to do that. So I'm of the opinion that you can go as complicated as you want, as long as at the end of the day, everything sort of fits together and makes sense. Like
Yes.
how in the Shadow Game series, like since the magic is currency, like then the plot is based around like investment schemes. Like I could have
Yeah.
done like a totally different magic system and still pursued that, but it makes them a little easier to swallow
Mhm.
when they fit together.
Yes. So, from the many story ideas that occur to you, how do you choose which ones to pursue?
That's a good question. I feel like my questionable answer to this is all of them. Um, like right now, I'm working on like I'm pretty much now wrapping up Queen of Wolves. It's pretty much now all the way done. But I have a YA fantasy that I'm working on. I've got my middle grade stuff. I've got an adult book I'm working on. Typically for me, it comes down to two things. One is like obviously which project I really love and which one I'm feeling drawn to right now. And then the other big thing is also just like at this point in my career is what makes sense to me professionally. For instance, I have a middle grade idea that I really love that I think would be so fun to write, but I'm currently publishing a middle grade series that I also love that
Yeah.
I hope is actually going to be like a large amount of books. And so that middle grade idea, as much as I love it, I can't really do anything with it for like, I mean, hopefully like years. So there's no point in working on it right now. So there's always that kind of question of like what makes sense for me to work on in addition to what am I feeling right now. Which can be a little bit hard, but at the same time, like writing is a lot of work. And I think I'd probably burn myself out if I was writing something that I knew like I couldn't do anything with for a long time. I need action.
Yeah, it makes sense. And what do you think the YA category has to say to the young readers today?
Oh man, I mean a whole bunch. YA is already so different from when I was a teenager, which honestly wasn't very long ago. There, I feel like fantasy has changed a lot. There are a lot more diverse books and options out there for readers. I've also seen YA become even more mainstream, and it was already pretty mainstream at the time of when I was younger, but like it has a huge amount of adults who read YA too, which is honestly pretty different. And I would say overall, I think if I was reading current YA as a teenager, I would really, really love it. I think it is exciting, it's different. And honestly, I think some of the coolest things that's happening in fantasy, and I think like the spotlight on diverse writers, I feel like YA is leading publishing right now, and that's something I really appreciate and that I'm really, really proud to be a part of.
Yes. And what do you want to bring to the YA category as a writer?
I would say that, let's see, when I started writing Ace of Shades, which is back when I was 17, my main goal and the goal that's kind of carried me through all these years of working on these books is that I really wanted to write a sprawling and complicated fantasy story that centered queer characters and especially teenage girls. Because when I was 17, I felt like it was when Game of Thrones was just starting to get really popular. And I felt like all the men around me, like I have a lot of uncles who I really admire,
Mhm.
who are avid readers, especially of fantasy. But I felt like everything they were talking about was like written by some like old white dude and like had like maybe two named female characters in it. And I just had no interest in reading them. And I said, you know
Yeah.
what? I want to write something that's like just as complicated and just as like worthy of respect and all of that stuff, but it's actually about a teenage girl and like a bunch of queer characters. And that's been my goal the entire time of the Shadow Game series. And having written the last book, I think that I've achieved that. Um, and yeah, I mean, other than that, I want to keep writing books with queer characters. I mean, I'm always game for fantasy books that kind of shake the fantasy genre a little bit. Daughter of the Burning City is like as much of a mystery book as it is a fantasy book. It's like two genres
Yeah.
at once,
Yes, it is.
and I love that kind of stuff. I love things that just, magic can mean a thousand different things. It can mean anything. That's like the whole point of it. But we actually have a very narrow definition of what fantasy is supposed to look like. And
Mhm.
I just love playing with ideas that kind of, that undermine that take it on a little spin.
That's so cool. And what hardships have you faced as an author because of your young age? Because I know you were published at a very young age. So,
Yeah,
what difficulties have you encountered along the way because of that?
that's a really good question. I feel like I should start off with saying that like, I see these conversations all the time and like they really break my heart about writers who are even as young as 30, but at honestly like any age who feel that publishing a book, especially in YA, that at some point like you age out of it and like you pass your expiration date, which is absolutely not true. There is no expiration date on writing. You can publish a book at 70, you can start striving towards this as like whenever you want to. I'm personally of the opinion that like overall it is like age is not a factor in all of this. I mean, if anything, I would ultimately say that my age has helped me in a lot of ways, and that, like, for instance, I'm not anywhere near the point where I would be thinking about having kids, and like I'm completely independent, and like that kind of stuff obviously makes being a full-time writer so much easier.
Yes.
Um, I'd say that when I first started out, so I decided when I was 17 was like the year for me when I was like, I am going to do this professionally, and I don't want to wait until like I get some English degree and I graduate college and like years down the line. Like, no, I want to do this right now. And I was initially really, really intimidated because up until that point, apart from like babysitting jobs, I had never been a professional. And I was suddenly throwing myself in with people who felt like so impressive to me, um, who like had been professionals in many different capacities. And I was just like, I felt like three small children in a trench coat. Um, I wrote my very first query letter to literary agents when I was 17. It was right after I graduated high school. And I remember I put in my bio that I was an English major at like XYZ University because technically I was like going to start college in the fall. So it wasn't a total lie. But I kind of thought that like they would think that I was 21, or like they'd think that I was a college senior, which in my head was like so old and respectable. Yeah, I was really nervous. I used to like go to events and I would dress like uber professionally because I didn't want people to think I was a child. There's definitely a large amount of publishing where like I wasn't of drinking age and I'd be going to publishing events and I couldn't drink. But like, you know, overall, I think most of the time it's more just it was never a lack of experience in terms of writing. I I worked really, really hard in terms of like learning craft and revising. Like, even though I was published young, like Daughter of the Burning City was the ninth book I'd ever written. And honestly, like when Daughter of Burning City was published, that I was on like my second agent. I had been like on full submission and rejected. Like I'd been around the block. And so even though I was young, like I felt like I had experienced a fair amount, but what has always been harder is just, yeah, like that level of like professional responsibility and feeling like the baby in the room a few times here and there. But like altogether, I honestly think I'm really, really lucky that I was able to get into this young. I feel like publishing, there's always a chance that it's not going to work out. Like even if you have a really great book, and I anytime you get a book deal, it feels sort of like hitting a home run. And like I think it would have happened for me eventually, but it happened to happen for me with that book. And so I consider myself very lucky to have started it this young because I don't know, it could have taken me like years and years later.
Well, that's great. And where do you get inspiration for your stories?
Hmm. A lot of different things. I usually always have concepts that interest me that I would love to write about, and that I'll try my hand at like a book to suit it over and over again, and then it'll never really be right. Like for instance, the adult book I'm working on right now, I have been trying to. I really liked the original title of it. It's not the title anymore, but like way back when, I think it was before Ace of Shades actually. I was like young in high school. I was working on this book called The Lantern Boy, and I loved the title, and I had like a few ideas about the world, and then, but it never worked. Like the book just, it never stuck. But I loved the title, and there was pieces of it that I still found so intriguing. So I tried like over and over and over again to write new versions of the same idea. And now it's finally worked as an adult book. And now that the Lantern Boy is like grown man, it can't be called the Lantern Boy anymore, which is why I call it Lant Man. If anyone watches my stories and is curious about that. Uh, but it finally worked. And so I feel like that's sort of how I get my ideas. Like there's just something a long time ago that I find intriguing and I keep hammering and I feel like it I have a lot of ideas at any one time, but in reality they're all like very old that have been like stewing and fermenting for like many, many years until I finally actually get to work on them. But I get a lot of inspiration. Pinterest is really helpful. Honestly, I would say the main thing is other forms of media, like a TV show that I love. I might feel like I want to write a book sort of like that. I want my, books that I read that I love. Like I want to write a book like that. I'd say that's kind of the main stuff for me.
Well, that's so interesting. And given that you write some very diverse books, what can you tell us about diversity in YA right now in the book industry?
Um, well, let's see. I think that in YA in particular, I think we're seeing more opportunities for diverse authors. Hopefully, more opportunities for diverse publishing professionals as well, like people who actually work in publishing houses, which, we have leagues to go in both categories. And I'd say that we're improving, but we still have a very long journey ahead in terms of books by more people of color, books by more LGBTQ authors. And like we're seeing it, there's clearly a demand. Like these books are doing so well. It's just, I'm hoping that with every year it gets better and better. And what's important is that we keep supporting these authors, we keep buying these books, and we continue to have conversations, especially in regards to people who actually work in publishing about like remote opportunities and paid internships and ships and
Yeah.
like all of that jazz. YA is doing well and it's doing better than I think a lot of other, but I don't think that there's still a long way to go.
Yes, definitely. Luckily, we're seeing like more diverse books with the passage of time. Like we find more authors that are like people of color and diverse authors as well who get their books
Mhm.
out there with their own voices, stories as well. So that's really nice.
Right.
Okay, so I asked you that you're a true bookworm and also a published author. So what do you think about the new trend of booktubers, bookstagrammers, and bloggers that's going on in the book community? Because it definitely wasn't around when you were a teen reader, right?
It actually was.
Oh,
Yeah,
but
I'm like still kind of a bit of a baby, but I actually was like I tried to book blog back in the day. I felt like if I wanted to get into publishing, I had to have like a big amount of Twitter followers and like stuff like that. So I started a book blog. Book YouTube was starting out. Instagram, I think, is the one thing that probably I remember getting an Instagram in college. So
oh,
I feel like that probably wasn't a big thing yet. But book YouTube and book blogs were really big, and book Twitter was already very big.
yeah,
And I love it. I think it's super fun. I would have loved Bookstagram when I was in high school. I would have loved all of that stuff in general. I feel like Twitter at the time when I was in high school, it wasn't something that a lot of teenagers had. It felt intimidating. I feel like a lot of grown-ups were on Twitter. That was like the more serious version of Facebook. And I would have liked to feel that connected because I had a lot of friends who were big readers, but like I was definitely the one who loved YA and was super interested in publishing. And I did end up connecting with a lot of people in the end of high school and early college who are like good friends of mine to this day and also have like author careers now. And like I knew them when. Um, but yeah, no, I love it. I think it's super fun.
definitely. Well, the trend is kind of new in my country, so that's why I assumed
Yeah, yeah.
it was going on when we were a teen because it's kind of starting out when I'm a teen, so that's why I made the relationship.
Yeah. No, it's so much fun.
Yeah,
Um,
and your bookstagram is really cool. So
oh,
you mentioned,
thank you. Yeah, I haven't had a lot to post in the past 2 months, but
yeah.
you know.
Well, you once said that you were tired of seeing female characters being called brave or for killing people, and that we should stop coding girls with masculinity and calling it feminism. That's a tweet you posted. So could you expand on that idea? So what would you define as a strong female character today?
Yeah, so I like the strong female character discussion is one that's been going on for a little while. And I think back when the discussion began, like most content creators are men. And so even when we say things like we want more strong female characters, the reins for those stories are still being handed to men. So even though we say what we want as women, like at the end of the day, it's for men to sort of interpret and decipher what we want, which is so frustrating.
Yeah.
And I felt that a lot of the content we were seeing, and some of the content, like produced by female authors, There is a big emphasis and a celebration of a strong female character as solely being the type of female character who like is really into like stabbing things or like is basically like full of toxic masculinity because that's how we define the word strong, which
Yes.
isn't fair. And so it was frustrating for me as a teenager, and it's a big reason why I wrote the character of N, because I felt like all the female characters who were being celebrated were kind of the same sort of person over and over again, and they were sort of just like the dude characters, but they happened to be female. And like not that we shouldn't support those female characters, we should support all female characters and all female content creators, but it just felt like our voices weren't really being heard, and that what we wanted from a strong character was simply a well-developed character, which can mean so many different things. You can have so many different types of female characters who are well developed. And yeah, that's a big reason why I wrote the character of N, who is like, wears pearls and wants to be a lady. And that's cool. And that's fine. We're not going to like shit on her for it.
Yeah, we're surprised by that. So, why do you think it's important to represent female diversity in books regarding feminism, which is kind of something you just said?
Yeah, I would say that just having varied types of women is all that's really important for feminism. I would
Yeah.
honestly love to see more female characters who aren't all like, obviously YA is different because YA is about teenagers, but like in adult fantasy, I would love to see more stories where like mothers are the main character. Don't
Oh,
see that very often. Don't see like old ladies that aren't just like evil witches. I don't. I'd love to see like more of that. But I think at the bottom line, it's just I would love to see more female fantasy authors. I would love to see more female fantasy authors who write adult fantasy who aren't accused of writing YA. I get tired of that discussion every single time of like going into the YA section of a bookstore and seeing an adult fantasy book there, and it's there because a female author wrote it. Like that's I love YA. I write YA. That frustrates me on their behalf. And yeah, having more female authors and celebrating more female authors and adapting more books written by female authors. I think all of that's really, really important.
yeah. So you've talked about diversity in terms of the LGBTQ community and also in terms of feminism. So you write some really diverse books in more than one aspect. So
Mhm.
do you, like, could I say that you write what you want to see in books? What do you think in feminism in fiction is lacking?
Let's see. I would say that, like, yes, I absolutely try to write what I would like to see more of books. I'm hoping that I am contributing to the book
Yeah,
catalog.
sure.
And yeah, I mean, I write queer stories because I'm a queer author, so I write really feminist stories because I'm a woman. And so like that's what I'm hoping that I can bring to the table and what I try to do like as best as I can. I'm trying to do my best to reflect the world around me and to do so with compassion and to do so with nuance. And you will fail at doing that if your characters are all one type of character. It won't be the world around you. And at that point, like, why are you writing that book at all?
So by doing that, what do you think, what do you want your readers to take away from your books? Like, what,
Um, I mean, on like a more serious level, I like love the idea of like for the Shadow Game series in particular that it's like a really sprawling, complicated fantasy story that has a lot of queer characters and a whole lot of female characters. And just I'm hoping that readers just feel seen. On like a sillier level, I really am just kind of out to entertain. I want them to enjoy it. I want like laughs, I want cheers, I want like the whole spectrum of emotions is usually what I aim for in a story. Yeah, I'd say those two things.
and what can you say on the importance of the Own Voices movement? You're kind of a part of it too, so
Like even if I'm a queer author, like I'm also a white author, and so there's like a portion of this discussion that I feel like I have a degree of let's say expertise in. Like I feel comfortable writing queer characters, especially queer characters who share my identities. But I also understand like as a white author, like if I were to try to like write about a lot of people of color as like a protagonist of my story, like that is not something that I experience. It is, I will never be able to write with the amount of nuance that like a person of color could, nor would I ever want to publish a book that would be taking the spot of a person of color author. Like I don't want to be taking somebody else's opportunity, especially an opportunity that they deserve more than I do. And so it's a movement that I understand from both of these different fronts. And at the same time, I think is incredibly important. I think that if we were to keep, if you want to be publishing these stories and putting this content in the world, it should be written by the people who know the content the best. Like why would you wouldn't want to put out an article or a piece of nonfiction written by someone who is an expert. And I think fiction should be held to the same standard.
Totally, totally. So every writer's journey is different, and yours started very young, as we discussed minutes ago. So what advice would you give to teen writers that are in the same situation you were a couple of years ago?
Yeah, I would say that, oh gosh, I feel like a lot of things. I would say my biggest piece of advice is that like you can start whenever you want to, but there's also no pressure to start right now. I feel like even as a teenager, like this idea of like having to be published young, it's like it's baloney. And like I felt it even when I was super young. I felt like if I didn't achieve something by like a certain milestone, that it would be too late for me. And I was a baby. So like if you're ready to jump into this and this is what you're passionate about, like go ahead and do it. There's nothing stopping you. Like that's what I say that oh gosh, I feel like a lot of things. I would say my biggest piece of advice is that like you can start whenever you want to, but there's also no pressure to start right now. I feel like even as a teenager, like this idea of like having to be published young, it's like it's baloney. And like I felt it even when I was super young. I felt like if I didn't achieve something by like a certain milestone, that it would be too late for me. And I was a baby. So like if you're ready to jump into this and this is what you're passionate about, like go ahead and do it. There's nothing stopping you. Like that's what I did. And like ultimately, I am really proud of what I achieved. Did I have a very traditional college experience? Like, no. Like, was I like sometimes making decisions that like maybe I wasn't ready about? Like, yes, but everybody learns by making mistakes regardless of how old you are. So go for it if that's what you want. But also at the same time, if you don't feel ready, if you want to focus on school, if you want to focus on literally anything else, there's no rush ever. Writing is something that is always waiting for you.
Well, I think that's a piece of advice that is lacking in the book community. I had never heard it before. So thank you for it, because it's really good.
No, I'm really glad to hear that. I have a definite soft spot in my heart for other teen writers that it just means a lot to me when I see other teens who are excited and interested in writing.
Definitely. I think it's very encouraging for people out there. Well, that's as far as we go with all the questions. I haven't prepared any others, so I don't know if people have questions in the comments, but otherwise, this is it.
Okay, yeah. I guess we can hang around a bit for questions, but I definitely wanted to say like thank you so much for preparing this. I really loved all the questions. I think they're super interesting. I obviously always love talking about like being like a teen writer and like fantasy and like diverse books. So yeah, I really, really appreciate it.
Well,
And I
thank
hope
you.
you're doing well amid all of this, everything that's going on.
Yeah, same goes for you. Well,
Uh,
thank you very much for the opportunity. I really like your books, and this has been an amazing way to spend the time in lockdown.
yeah.
Very lovely.
No, thank you so much. That really means a lot to me.
It has been one of the most interesting interviews I have carried out, and
Oh
I
yeah.
really love it. So,
Oh man, I'm very flattered.
well, thank you very much. Take care.
Great, thank you so much. Bye bye.
Bye.